Moving on to, again, just before I do, let me thank our panelists, panel 1 and panel 2. I think we had some great discussions in the first session. So to this second session, we have our other keynote speaker, who is Nick Chubb. And Nick is the founder and managing director of Thetis, a research and consulting firm leading in intelligence and analysis of emerging technologies within the ocean supply chain. Nick holds a firm belief that emerging technology has the power to transform the shipping industry, making it safer, more efficient, and more environmentally friendly. So this is a perfect topic for our forum today. So I'd like to invite Nick to take the floor, please, and we look forward to hearing from you. Warm welcome to Nick Chubb.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, first off, to the 4 hosting charities for organising today, and particularly to Jan for pulling all of this together, and to Inmarsat for hosting. I'm so incredibly excited to physically be here in a room talking to people and not staring at a screen. You could be forgiven for thinking this is the first time I've actually given a live speech to a room full of people since the start of the pandemic. It very nearly was, but I actually gave a speech on Friday because it was my wedding day. After a year's delay, thank you. After a year's delay, I finally made it down the aisle. And over the weekend, we were reflecting on those of our friends who couldn't make the wedding. You see, the problem with going to sea for a career is that at any one time, half of the friends you make will be away. And usually for major life events, such as weddings, with enough notice, you can plan around them and make sure you're at home for them, but not so in a pandemic. So despite knowing how desperate they were to be there were a great many people who were unable to make it, including my best man, who missed getting off the ship by 2 days because of quarantine rules, and some of the bride's oldest and closest friends from her college days. They were absent too because of COVID-related delays to the ship's schedule. Now, in the context of the range of issues that the world's wonderful seafarer welfare services deal with, a missed wedding in a wealthy country is nothing to worry about. But for me, it was a very poignant and personal reminder that at least in the UK, we start to get some semblance of normality. We can all meet for weddings and conference events like this, that the crew change crisis is actually far from over. And that the headlines in the mainstream press, though they've long faded and moved on, I'm acutely aware that the people who make up the backbone of our industry are still facing a hardship that's difficult for any of us to fully comprehend. I was asked here this afternoon to come and speak about the work we've done in the last 2 years to better understand seafarer welfare issues and explore the ways that technology can help. In the time I have, I'd like to discuss 3 things. The first is the importance of equality of access to support services for the world's seafarers. The second is the responsibility that comes with control. And the third is the role of technology and of trust in improving the lives of those at sea. Before I begin, I'd like to place a big caveat on everything I say. I don't categorize myself as an expert on welfare, mental health, physical health. I don't even categorize myself as an expert on technology. I'm speaking here today primarily in my limited experience as a seafarer, and I base what I say on the work that I and the team that I work with have done in the last 2 years to bring together research from different fields and keep tabs on what's going on with maritime technology. I certainly don't have any answers, and my intention this afternoon is purely to spark debate and discussion, and I hope that in turn that may lead to some action. To describe the first of my 3 talking points, equality of access, I'd like to tell you about 2 other would-be wedding guests who never made it to our day. The first is my big brother, who we lost to suicide on the 14th of January 2014. The second is a dear friend of mine from my days at Nautical College, who we lost in the same way in May that year, 4 months after my brother. Both of these men were in their 20s when they passed away. Both of these men would light up a room when they entered, and both of these men were loved by everyone whose lives they touched. But they each had vastly different experiences of dealing with mental health issues. The first sign that my brother was unwell came years before we lost him. It took us a little while to fully understand it, but as soon as we did, we had immediate access to the very best that the National Health Service could provide. We had access to their mental health crisis support team. We had support from specially trained emergency services personnel. We had access to inpatient stays at psychiatric hospitals, and ongoing support to live a relatively full life as he recovered from a combination of mental health issues. My brother's illness was complex, it was difficult to diagnose, and it was even more difficult to treat. Sadly, I don't doubt that we would have lost him eventually, but equally, I have no doubt that the incredible care he received brought us 7 precious years with him before we did. By contrast, my friend from college had never displayed any hints of difficulty with his mental health. The day that we lost him, he received some bad news from home, and within a few short hours, he had written and sent a goodbye to the world, to friends and family, and then he jumped overboard on a moonlit night in the Mediterranean Sea. And the details of it are so eerily similar to Graham's story earlier, I actually think they may be the same person. In his goodbye, he explained with great clarity why he felt he had no other option but to end his life. My sincere hope at the time was that he had stayed with us long enough to see a fraction of the outpouring of love and support that came in response to his message. But I also knew, having studied and lived alongside him for 3 years, that his diligence and his ability to see out every task he started without fail meant that he did not. He was 1 week away from completing his first trip as a third mate after passing his officer of the watch exams. And just as I have no doubt that we would have lost my brother eventually, in the case of my dear college friend, I have no doubt that had he felt he had any other option but to take his own life, he would have taken it. So what can we learn from these 2 stories? Well, unfortunately, it teaches us a very painful lesson that sometimes the very best of care and support, administered in a timely way, cannot always save someone. But it also teaches us that equality of access to critical services, whether that's mental, physical, or spiritual support in times of need, is critical in creating better outcomes in our industry. In research that we conducted before the pandemic, we found there was actually no evidence that mental health issues among seafarers were significantly higher than the general population. Mental health issues affect around 1 in 4 people. The numbers are similar with seafarers. The trend is ever so slightly higher. It runs at about 28%. This is pre-pandemic figures. Just a couple of percentage points higher than in the general population. But the important distinction here is not in how common mental health issues are, but in the equality of their outcomes. At sea, the rate of proven suicides is nearly 4 times higher than for populations on land. And I'll stress again that that's pre-pandemic, and this also excludes figures where suicide cannot be proven because the person's lost overboard. So the real story is likely far worse than these figures tell us, and Graham mentioned earlier some stats that I don't know exactly where they came from, but they included suspicious deaths as well, and the figure came out about 15 times higher. So we know it's a significant issue. It's not just an issue of suicide, though. Mental health problems, which are often left untreated at sea, actively contribute to the risk of accidents. Seafarers who are depressed or suffering from anxiety are twice as likely to get injured or to suffer from an illness while on board compared with those who are not. Seafarers are not special. We get all of the same issues that everyone ashore does. The key difference is that while someone ashore can privately and discreetly seek support, more often than not, this is not the case at sea. So I would urge you, whether you work for a shipping company, a welfare organisation, or any other supporting organisation, to pursue as far as practical the equality of access to support services when people need it, and make it possible not just to tap into the same networks of support and assistance that we all enjoy ashore. That, to me, will go a long way to improving welfare in the 21st century. Despite everything I just said about mental health, contrary to popular belief, over the last 2 years of research we've done, we've actually found no evidence that suicide is in fact the leading cause of death at sea. Suicide actually comes in third, perhaps unsurprisingly, behind accidents and incidents on board, and perhaps more surprisingly, behind cardiac events such as heart attacks. The reason I say it's surprising is that a seafarer is actually twice as likely to die at sea due to a cardiac-related illness as they are to die by suicide. But in the last 5 years, mental health issues and suicide among seafarers have received 10 times more press coverage than stories related to cardiac health and heart attacks at sea. In one mortality study that was focused on a population of Polish seafarers, circulatory diseases accounted for 80% of non-accidental deaths. In a third of those cases, cardiac problems had already been diagnosed before the voyage began. It's particularly prevalent in men over the age of 40, but it is also often largely preventable. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, smoking, obesity, a lack of exercise, they all contribute to the development of the disease. And there are three key tools for limiting the risk of cardiovascular disease. These are diet, sleep, and exercise. Unfortunately, though, for many seafarers, as I'm sure you can appreciate, those factors largely exist outside of their control. That brings me nicely onto my second topic of conversation, which is control. I'll tell you a story. In the 1960s, a young Australian doctor named Michael Marmot, who specialises in epidemiological research, landed in London from Australia and was looking for a large body of people he could study to understand the effects of work on health. And one day he stumbled upon the great machinery that is the British government. At the time, the civil service was made up of tens of thousands of people who did desk work for standardised rates of pay and standardised working conditions across the board. He set about studying their health and kicked off a research effort that still continues to this day. The Whitehall studies, as they've become known, have run a nearly continuous longitudinal cohort analysis of the health of tens of thousands of civil servants working in Whitehall from 1967 all the way through to 2020. And when they started the study, they assumed that those at the top of the civil service, who led the most stressful lives and had so many decisions to make, would be the most stressed and therefore most likely to have a heart attack. When the results came out, 15 years after the study started, it was found that the reverse was true. Those at the top of the civil service were actually 4 times less likely to have a heart attack than people at the bottom. And further, you could plot a graph, as your rank in the civil service rose, your chances of developing depression fell, literally step by step. There was a very, very close relationship between becoming depressed and where you stood in the hierarchy of the civil service. So the researchers decided to investigate this further, in fact for another 10 years, to try and find out why. And what they found is that the reason depression and cardiac risk dropped with rank is that those who rose higher in the ranks had more control over their life. The researchers studied people in the same rank, with the same pay, with the same status, working in the same office, and found that those who had a greater degree of control over their work were a lot less likely to get depressed or develop severe emotional distress. The relationship between control and health is significant. And going to sea is an act of relinquishing control. You relinquish control to myriad external factors, such as the weather or the needs of a charterer in a distant office. But you also relinquish control over things that many of us take for granted, such as your diet, your ability to exercise, and your ability to sleep through the night. We've all learned a great deal about the impact of relinquishing control in the last 18 months. We've all learned the detrimental effects it has of not being able to do the things that make us feel better and not knowing when life will return to normal. When we look at welfare holistically, mental, social, and physical health are interdependent and they're linked. For example, depression and anxiety are positively correlated with cardiac disease and sleep disorders in seafarers. In relinquishing control in the way that they have to do their jobs, all seafarers are increasing their own personal risk factors when it comes to health. Based on this, I would urge everyone who's involved in supporting those at sea to consider the importance of giving as much control back to individuals as is practical, and where you can't, in making the best possible choices for the well-being of those individuals. So, how do we achieve that? This brings me nicely onto my final topic for this afternoon, technology and trust. Now, I believe that the world's seafaring community and the profession as a whole is at a very critical juncture. In the last 18 months, we've demonstrated, despite enormous efforts put in by so many people, including many people in this room, we've demonstrated a collective inability to organise a unified voice that speaks at the highest levels for the welfare of the 1.6 million men and women who go to sea, the 1.6 million men and women who keep society functioning. Consequently, I believe that trust between the seafaring community and the stakeholders that rely on them is currently very low. Technology and trust are an important combination. I sincerely believe that technology without trust can be dangerous. As the 21st century progresses, we are at the beginnings of a radical transformation in how we live and work. There's a bigger shift to humanity happening than the agricultural revolution, than the invention of the written word, or even the discovery of electricity. As humans, we're really not very good at looking ahead and predicting exponential change. But by looking back, we can gain a bit of an understanding of how fast technology is accelerating. It took airlines 68 years to reach 50 million users. It took the telephone 50 years to reach the same milestone. It took television 22 years, it took computers 18 years, it took the internet 7 years, it took Facebook 3 years, and it took Pokemon Go 19 days to hit 50 million users. If we pull that back to the maritime industry, the rapid growth in autonomous technology means that a future where ships have very, very small crews, or possibly just a handful of operators, is not actually very far away at all. It's highly likely that in the not-so-distant future we'll have unmanned bridges in the same way that we have unmanned machinery spaces today. With the vast majority of tasks automated away, a very small team, 2 or 3 people, supported by a team ashore, may be able to operate a deep-sea ship on their own for months at a time. As that happens, the responsibility on us as an industry to look after those who are at the sharp end drastically increases. At this point, I could talk about some of the companies doing groundbreaking work to improve the lives of those at sea. For example, I could talk about Scoutbase, the Danish startup we heard from earlier, whose anonymous reporting tool makes it possible for fleet managers to get a real-time and continuous view of the mood on board and emerging issues. I could also talk about the work that I'm very proud of, facilitating in partnership with Inmarsat, a program that's allowed 2 startups to be funded to test and implement a real-time fatigue monitoring traffic light system on board a Shell ship. I could also talk about innovators like those at Big Yellow Fish in India. They've created a gamified platform that helps crew members to self-assess and work through basic psychological problems like stress and anxiety. But instead, I'd rather issue a warning. Technology is not in any way a silver bullet for the industry's welfare issues. Technology is an amplifier. It allows you to do things faster, cheaper, and at a larger scale. But it's completely neutral. No technology is inherently good or bad. It's about how it's used. For example, nuclear technology can be used to power homes or make bombs. Social media can be used to connect people to their loved ones, or it can be used to subvert elections. Technology will only amplify the outcome, whether that's good or bad. I mentioned earlier that I believe that trust between the seafaring community and the world's maritime stakeholders is low. Unfortunately, I believe that if it's handled in the wrong way, technology may actually amplify this issue. Speaking directly to ship operators in the room now, if you operate in a low-trust environment where blame culture is high and psychological safety is low, introducing technology will only amplify this. By contrast, if you operate in a high-trust environment where the culture is strong and collaboration between ship and shore is secure, technology will amplify that. Technology cannot solve the industry's welfare issues. It only has the potential to amplify what already works. As the march of technology forever quickens, redesigning seafarer welfare for the 21st century will require us to pursue equality of access for support services for those at sea, whether it's physical, emotional, or their spiritual needs. As crews get smaller and port stays shorter, that actually includes placing more of an emphasis on access to support while on board and while on leave, and not necessarily while in ports. It will require us to give as much freedom as possible to individuals at sea and to make the best decisions we can for them when they can't have control. That includes a duty of care that's on all of us that covers diet, exercise, sleep and fatigue to prevent issues as well as providing access to the right support when issues arise. Lastly, it requires us to rebuild a bond of trust between the industry and those who go to sea that I think has been slowly eroded over many years, a pattern that's been accelerated by the pandemic. This includes creating the mechanisms that allow for the collective voice of seafarers to engage decision makers at the highest levels of government, industry and commerce, which I think Mark articulated very well earlier on today. Technology has a role to play in all of these, but technology can only amplify the good and the bad. It cannot be that silver bullet. In closing, I'd like to leave the final comments to one of my team. Nick she's one of our technology analysts. She's a straight-talking Australian and master mariner. She's worked on just about every vessel type conceivable over a long career. She's also a co-author on all of our recent welfare reports on technology, which I'd recommend that you check out. She's actually at sea as I speak. She's volunteering on a sail training vessel. And I asked her recently for her opinion on welfare, and she told me this. Don't overlook the critical factor. Seafarers are not special. We're just human. We have the same wants and needs as humans everywhere. If you've never been to sea, just imagine that you have to spend months at a time away from home. All of your main decisions, including food choices, daily routine, ability to communicate with your family, access to healthcare and support services are out of your control. What would you want? What would make it more bearable? What would make you feel like you had some control over your life? That's probably a good place to start thinking about seafarer welfare. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. And just before we're a little bit over time, but I think we probably should give you at least one question to field for us. That I'm looking at the title of the paper here, that how will seafaring change in the coming decades? And you've given some examples of that, and how should the welfare sector adjust to that? And I think somewhere in a press release you talked about parity between sea and shore not being attainable, but is it possible that you envisage a situation then that with the reduced crewing that the services could be more equated, or at least the size of the problem becomes less? Is that really where you're going in your assumptions?
I think there's a few aspects to that. One, I think, is actually what we've learned through the course of the pandemic by looking at, for example, the National Health Service in the UK and various other health services around the world, and their ability to switch to remote provision, remote diagnostic tools. And actually, I was listening to a debate fairly recently that was discussing the topic of GP appointments, and what they've seen is that people are much more willing to come forward and speak to their GP when it's remote, either through chat or through video call, than they are necessarily to go in person. So I think there's a lot of good things that we can capture from what's happened in the pandemic and apply that at sea, particularly as the rollout of continuous connectivity is absolutely zero doubt on the way. I'm not as surprised as other panelists have been about the lack of Wi-Fi at sea, but I know that is something that is changing very, very quickly. And I think once we get to that point, it just opens up a whole raft of new things that can be done. Total parity, probably not entirely possible. But if you think about everything that we can access ashore when we need it, I think that makes a big difference and gets us a lot of the way there, I guess.
Yeah, because some of our existing challenges will be here for some time. I'm thinking in terms of where these more autonomous ships will be. It's probably in parts of the world where it is more equitable, whereas what we're looking at in the global reach of shipping and in other traditional sectors, it will be some time before we really catch up, I guess. So.
Yeah, I think it's that kind of age-old saying is that the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. And I think maritime is a great example of that. I think we do see leaders and we see followers and we see those who don't follow. Over time, those who don't follow will unfortunately have to be forced to follow. I think that's what tends to happen because the regulators get a hold of it. But I think that sort of change, that sort of systemic change is quite a long way off.
Absolutely. Anyway, thank you, Nick. Great food for thought. Thank you very much to Nick Chubb. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to call on the next panel, who I'm told are in this room. So this will make a bit of a change. I won't have to break my neck on the screen here. But in doing so, I'm first of all going to call Ronald. Is Ronald Spit out here? Oh, there he is. Can't recognize anyone with their masks on. If you could take to the lectern, you're going to be our speaker here, Ronald. Don't look so surprised. You are our speaker for... And if I could also ask our other members of the panel to come and join me up here. We have Sarah Badd and we have Katie Higginbottom of ITF. But I'll do the introductions in a moment. Please have a seat. And then I'll invite Ronald here, who is, again, someone who probably doesn't need an introduction here, as president of Inmarsat Maritime. And he's transitioned through Inmarsat into that leading role, and in fact a leading role in the maritime industry. And I didn't know this, was ranked 28 in the Lloyd's List Top 100 Most Influential People. It's here, so I have to read it. And that for the role in driving digitalization, if I could say it. But I suppose that, all joking aside, I mean, if that's what it is, 28th, it shows that digitalization is a rising focus. out of those top 100, which I know contains a lot of traditional people in operations. So anyway, well done on that. So Ronald, we look forward to hearing from you and sharing your thoughts with us before you join us on the panel. Over to you, Ronald.
All right, thank you very much. Well, that number 28 is the company. It just needed a face in that book, right?
All right, okay.
So don't make it too big, please. No, well, first of all, I'm very happy to be back here in a similar way as you. I haven't been here until last week, and before that, close to 2 years, not. My last working day, as many of you had before the pandemic, was 16th of March last year. And I kind of lost a full year in the meantime. Lots happened, though, because the last 2 years we haven't been sitting idle. And especially not the last 18 months when we were all sitting at home, we haven't been sitting idle. It has been a magnificent, busy part of my life. But on the other hand, it feels like it was just a blip, because this feels different. I don't know how it is to you, but I find team meetings extremely tiring for long term. This is costing energy, but it gives more energy back as well if you do something like this. If you're sitting behind a screen, apparently for us as a human being, it's very tiring and frightening to stare each other in the eye from 15 centimeters different or 30 centimeters for longer than an hour, right? So at the end of the day, you're exhausted. Well, you can do this for weeks, right? Because it gives more energy, because it's collaborative. But if the pandemic did something to us, and I heard Nick use the similar words, I will use them in a little bit different connotation, but if the pandemic did anything to us over the last 18 months, it is that it amplified the needs of the seafarers, and that it magnified the belief in the industry that things can be done in a different way. All kinds of stakeholders are looking around to do things different in the post-pandemic period, hopefully. And that, as a result, digitalization accelerated. I think that's a common belief, and you see that everywhere around. For us, it was a great proof point over the last 18 months that our platform was capable of rolling out large number of values over the air, right? Bringing professional help, either mental help or medical help, in reach of the seafarer while out at sea. That was for us a technical proof point. Can we do that without touching the vessel? And we could over the platform. And we heard about Wi-Fi and the rollout. In many cases, you need to touch the vessel, but also there, it is pretty simple today. I will come back on convergence of technology, because I'm here to represent the technology side of the house, of course. So that kind of worked, and we see that working, and we see many people having the benefits of that. But if I listen then for this this half day that I've been sitting here, I see a remarkable difference with how we did this 2 years ago. At the start of the meeting, I always think, do we have enough topics to fill a day? Well, actually, as last time, 2 years ago, we can fill a week with topics like this. But what makes it different this time for me is that I feel that there is a much higher level of openness to address these kind of things. And openness for me starts to equal learning. Openness means sharing. And this topic can only be solved to some extent if we start to share and learn. And it doesn't have a lot to do with technology, actually, but that is the difference that I experience when sitting in this room. Now, speaking about sharing and learning, we are doing GMDSS for more than 30 years now. And most of the people are believing that GMDSS is about systems and technology. Well, it is only very partially it is. Yes, it is about preempting satellite paths in case when a panic button is being hit and things like that. And it is the link with terrestrial networks and make that technically work. And it's extremely reliable, I know that all. But most of all, it is the collaboration of the people behind those systems. And it is a system of processes that works together pretty well. And also from DMDSS, we don't take a lot of learning. So I'm very happy that you can go to our website and take the report off, because for the first time in the 30 years, we bitten the bullet and put a lot of data together in an attempt, like you said, John, to make it knowledge at the end that we can do something with. We call the report the future of maritime safety. And for me, safety is much wider than saving an asset or saving a life. It is much more the safety and well-being of everything around maritime. So we took all that data and put it in a report. Hopefully we can all learn from it. And I think it's pretty insightful. But this is a one-off. And that brings me to the major topic that I like to bring in, because these things shouldn't be one-offs. It should be self-propelling learning. It should be something that goes automatically in a proactive way. A lot of what we do on GMDSS is very reactive and manual. And I always wonder why we wouldn't use the modern day technology, where it indeed took only about a few days to reach 50 million people with Pokemon. Why don't we use modern day technology, wideband technology, cloud-based internet services and the likes of, to make these things better, more proactive, and then take then safety, not as just safety of saving assets, but much more well-being as well. And whereby well-being at sea is much more than just staying alive. So I see a convergence of interest here from a technology perspective, because somewhere in the panel this morning it was touched upon the item of cost, right, and the bottom line. And actually, if you take a distant look at it, the same platforms that are giving you the opportunity to do digital twins, to take a buzzword, right, give you exactly the same opportunity to do social media. The same platform that gives you video sharing and situational awareness can be used to build on connectivity with the homes. Right? The same platforms that give you IoT, right, allow you to do magnificent crew tracking to enhance safety on board. So what I mean is that the digital platforms that we're rolling out nowadays and that allowed us to do rolling out of services at scale can be used to enhance crew welfare and well-being at very little incremental cost. And when you're talking about is crew welfare then a cost, well, it's actually a side increment to what you should be doing anyway on board with respect to digital platforms to increase your profitability and to do smarter sailing and to do better business. So it is not that you have to take a decision, shall we do a platform for crew welfare or not? 80% of that is already there when you're choosing a digital platform on board. So it is not a massive incremental cost that you get. And as I don't know who said it, bringing on the Wi-Fi routers on board is the last little blip that anyone can do. Right? So, in short, I'm all for a kind of different approach to how we tackle this topic. The technology is there. And the technology was there for many other things as well. But you saw that the industry only started to change rapidly, for instance, when targets were set and regulations were set for far away with respect to emission control. The whole monitoring and reporting of how green a vessel is making a direct impact on the bottom line of the vessel. And that is because many of the parties around it, the big stakeholders around it, and the charterers and the financiers, start to have an interest in that, and the ports as well. I can imagine that in a similar way, if we set, as an industry-wide, we set ourselves targets for how good we are in bringing well-being on board of the vessels, and set ourselves a target and start sharing those data and reporting on it, that there will be big stakeholders around the industry who will pretty much and pretty quick make it clear that that is good for them as well. And then you will see the economics change behind that, and then we're not talking about cost centers anymore. Right? So we can drive that whole upside. If we do it like this, whereby the keywords are sharing, where the keywords are learning and monitoring of this, then I really think that the technology is just there and that we can accelerate well-being at sea pretty much. That's my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. Come and join us here. I have some questions for you, but I'm going to bring in our other panelists first, and then we'll get back to some of those. And again, something that I said earlier, the reason why I've got an additional table, I'm growing tables here, is that I have the questions on here as well as over here. So I'm going to try and make sure that we cover as much of this as we can. But I'd like to, I'm going to introduce both panelists at this point and then ask each of them to take the floor. But first of all, we have Sarah Bad from Sailors Society. And if I'm reading this correctly, Sarah, you've been there as CEO since September last year. Yeah. So again, very recent appointment. And I know that you're engaged in strategy development there, as well as other things. So what is the key strategies that you're looking at the moment? What is the outlook that you have? And not directly related to what Ronald was saying, but perhaps related back to Mark and his surprise at how many have access. I think you have the stats on that. Maybe you could share that with us as you're giving us the overview of where things are going with the Sailors Society, okay? Just before you do, we have Katie Higginbottom here from ITF Seafarers. Is it Seafarers Section or the Seafarers Trust? It says section here. That's Seafarers Trust, which is slightly different.
But joined at the hip.
But joined at the hip, as we would expect everybody in ITF to be. But no, I'm really pleased to have Katie here to give us that perspective from the Seafarers Welfare Programme perspective that you have there. So we look forward to hearing from you as well. So if I give the floor to you first, Sarah, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. You're right. I've literally been here for a year now. So it's been a hectic year, I would say, but it's good to be in an organisation that has been here for 200 years. So this is actually not the first pandemic that we have seen, but it's definitely the biggest one and the one that we have much more digital support around. I think when we're looking to the future, and when we're looking, we've got a number of different big programs, but one that I thought was really timely that I wanted to talk a bit more about here is obviously our Wellness at Sea program, that actually we launched 7 years ago now. But that's looking at all the wellness that we talked about here, but not wellness as in mental health, wellness as in spiritual health, or wellness as in physical health, but bringing it all together. And we're bringing it all together in a digital format. And that's something that we have launched and that we have delivered for quite some time now. And that's very much when you're asking me, where do we see ourselves going? That is definitely one of the projects that we are moving forward with. During the pandemic, we were really lucky to see early on that there was a real need for this. It created a campaign, a 27-week campaign, which we offered for free to the ship, the owners and the manning agency, etc., to deliver on their own rights. And it was a huge success. Lots of people take it on. And then we started it on and we said, time to go it again. On popular demand, let's do it again. And we just launched it a couple of weeks ago, again, for the second lot. And this time around, we included the even bigger picture. We included the shore-based staff. We included the families. Because I think that, for us, is the bit that we mustn't forget when we're talking about welfare. Welfare is all those things that we mentioned, but it is also the families, it is the communities, it is the financial situation. All of those things need to be looked at when we're looking at welfare. And then, yes, digital has a really important role to play there in terms of how we get that to them. But I think, first of all, we need to look at it as a holistic sort of thing around what welfare is really all about. But we also, as I said, all of that, we have started to deliver digital. We have started to look at how can we get that to the seafaring community and the wider community digitally. But the big thing here is that we still have very few that can actually access internet on board the ships. I mean, and we were talking about this in the break. Andrew raised, he said, does anyone have a statistic on this? At the moment, Nautilus, and that's why I brought all my papers up here, Nautilus International showed that only 57% have access to satellite phones and personal emails. And fewer can get onto social media sites, and only 6% have video calling facilities at the moment. So we're talking, yes, we need to move digital. Yes, we need to go. Technology has a really important role to play in the future, but we mustn't forget where we are now as well, and the importance of taking that into consideration in the work that we're doing, I think. So that's probably a little bit. I could talk lots about all the different projects and work that we do at Sailor Society, but that's some of them that I thought would be really relevant to the discussion.
No, we'll certainly try and get to those. So you're saying 57%, I know it's a Nautilus, I don't know how big a survey that is, but 57% in the area that they're involved in is still pretty low.
It is.
And even then, that's not full access, that's just
That's just
some
for
basic access.
satellite phones and personal emails, and only
Yeah.
6% can actually have video facilities. And I think that says a lot, and I think that's really important that we have those figures in mind when we're talking about what we need to and should be doing.
Yeah, but it strikes me that part of what we've got to do here is take that discussion into some of the points that you made and some of the points that Mark made, is that do many operators consider it a cost issue when it's perhaps not the cost issue that they think it is? And maybe we have to quantify that a bit better and maybe try and progress that discussion in that way. But I think this gives us a very sharp, clear picture of the size of the issue that we have, right?
Yeah, and it
There's-
also re-emphasised that there's a real need for that face-to-face still as well, you know.
Yeah.
And like Andrew said before, and I think he spoke really well for all of us charities operating within it, that even if we can move forward on things, that need to actually see people face-to-face is going to be really crucial in wherever we're going. But they should work together. Obviously, we should work together with the digital.
Well, no, it is, and you know, again, just something else back to our previous panel with Mark is that I fully accept that we have pressures on our shore-based employees and those at sea, and I think that also talks to a point where that engagement has been drastically reduced, not just through the fine work that's done with the charities and the engagement in the ports and so on, but just simply managers ashore getting on board ships to engage with managers on board and to talk to them about things that are important and let them know they're supported. So it really has been a perfect isolation in many ways. I mean, yeah, people ashore, we've made it work. We've been able to work remotely. You're right, it is more tiring because people have back-to-back meetings. You don't just walk over to someone's desk and talk to them, you arrange a meeting. And the whole process has become intense, is probably a good word for that. But anyway, we'll come back to some of these themes. So, to you, Katie, that in terms of the seafarers' welfare section, and you're having a lot of that feedback that I mentioned in my opening remarks today that Steve shared with me, but how are you looking at the world? What do you see the big challenges?
So I think what I'd like to say, being in this room today, is that it's really nice to be together with like-minded people, all agreeing about what needs to be there and all of the measures that are being taken and the technology that's there. But you mentioned, I think, in your opening presentation, the Yale research that the Trust commissioned some time ago, and that was before the COVID pandemic, and that was linking all the kind of key factors that correlate with poor mental health, with depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. Yeah. And at that time, in that report, it focused on some specific operational things. The key things were all operational things. So it was like people's contracts being extended. It was people being out of control, as Nick said, about not feeling well enough trained to do the task they've been given. People not having control over their living and working conditions. People being fatigued. Massive correlation with fatigue. But if we talk about fatigue and then we go into a different audience and start to mention things like minimum safe manning, then it all gets slightly different and a bit more controversial and a bit more about the bottom line and a bit more, there's a little bit less consensus, shall we say. So I think for me, the sort of elephant in the room, which Nick also kind of brought out, is the fact that we haven't been successful in fixing the crew change crisis as an industry. The shipping companies haven't, the unions haven't, the welfare organisations certainly haven't. And I don't think it's through lack of coordination. There is coordination, and technology, as you say as well, has opened up a whole load of new avenues of ability to connect with people and be having global meetings all around the world at the same time. But it hasn't brought power. It hasn't brought power to the sector. So when there's an argument about, can we open up this border? No, the health minister says no. The shipping minister is not in the room. So, I think there are some really structural problems, historic structural problems within the shipping industry that mean that lobby isn't there. And I think it's kind of interesting to hear of proposals to have different committees and different collaborations and coordinations, which probably not a bad thing. But there's a big kind of economic power factor behind all of it, and it also on a different level reminds me of an event I organised when I was in the ITF proper quite a long time ago about young seafarers, to take young seafarers to the IMO to say what their issues were. Mm-hmm. And the seafarers from Europe, their issue was too much paperwork, not enough time, too much admin. And the seafarers from the Philippines and India said, contracts. We have no power because we haven't got permanent employment, and that would make the key difference. So when people have said, and a few kind of controversialists have said, why don't the seafarers go on strike? That's because they don't have the power, because they're on contract labour. So I think those are the kind of underlying dynamics that make it, really hard to see how the kind of consensus around good practice for welfare is going to really shift things without those kind of core issues being addressed.
No, I think that's interesting. That I think it's to all the points that we've heard. The one thing that just resonated there with what you said, Katie, is when we used to take, as an industry, seafarers along to meet the IMO General Secretary. And the last one I had any involvement with was, I think it was Metropolis. I think that's a couple of General Secretaries ago. And but I remember the feedback was not being able to get ashore. When so that was like from all the nationalities. You're quite right. It was sort of it was different views from different locations. But one of the common theme was now we go into ports where seafarers just simply cannot get off ships, no shore leave, and or they're in the end of a terminal somewhere. And and obviously I think that brings us back to the good work done by the charities here. You talk about this isolation and how happy there is all the seafarers are for that communication. Again, many years pre-COVID and everything else, but has that really improved? Take that one, probably not, right? So it is a shocking situation. However, I'm going to go to the questions here. There's a couple of things here, and they're moving quite quickly as I speak, but now, some of them are like statements, but I'm going to cover them because if someone took the time to send in a statement, I want to acknowledge that as well. At least I'm reading it as more of a statement than a question. And one from Mary Cresta: what actions IMO takes in order to resolve the issue of the seafarers being on board so long with not any plan on how to repatriate them? And I think that came through in one of our earlier discussions. How powerful or powerless are some of these associations in dealing with that? And people do look to IMO. Perhaps Mark O'Neill had a point that to solve everything, it's not a panacea, so there are some limitations. However, people look there for the voice of the industry, perhaps. And there was one here for you, Ronald, but I'll need to keep scrolling till I find it. But and then there was one from earlier today from Stephen Jones about the feedback from the Seafarers Happiness Index. And that's an issue of a lack of trust, which I think is what Nick talked about there, and that manifests itself in those questions. And connectivity is being worked on by Inmarsat, but is digital overload via too many apps and digital solutions causing more distress when a seafarer is in a crisis? Are we drowning out the core value of the mental health service by providing too many apps, too many digital solutions? I'm going to lob that one to you, Ron. This is from Lisa Moore, incidentally. Do you get feedback like that, or?
Well, I can react on it. I mean, whether we have too many apps in our lives or not, that's not a question for seafarers alone. But I won't go there, because that's a much wider discussion. But when I listen to what Mark was saying and what Graham was saying in the beginning, I think they are the exceptions in the industry who realize that if you are really concerned about the mental health of your people, you should give them as much as possible access to apps and internet so that you can monitor what they are doing on the internet. And it gives you early warnings about their mental state, the way they behave on the internet. If you restrict that, you will never know. And they are the exceptions, Mark and Graham, that make that calculation that those stress factors are equaling the bottom line. Because somebody said earlier today that almost all the accidents and failures at sea are human-made. And if you just look at the insurance amount that is being paid out and claimed every year as a result of that, it's a very simple question. Everyone should have internet at sea. And it should not be a discussion with the superintendent whether that is costing $20 a month or not. Because if you look at billions every year that are completely wasted in damages that are human-made because of stress and fatigue, I really am mind-boggled why this is a discussion at all, whether we have too many apps or not. Yeah, my kids have too many apps, I know, but they still have it, and I'm not restricting it. So,
just to kind of take that back to you, Katie, in the sense that you're dealing with areas which are much more fundamental, it seems, but you know, I think technology has its place in helping this. It's just a bit of something that relates back to an earlier question. I'm thinking here of, and what I'm scribbling here is digital technology the solution to seafarers' welfare, or does it confuse the message, or where does it fit to tick the box for our seafarers?
Well, I think, so if I went off on a bit of an ITF tangent, I suppose, in my first opening comments, but coming back to what the Trust does, I think, you know, probably pre-COVID, we'd already sort of reviewed our strategy and looked at, you know, previously we'd put a lot of funding into, probably I should go back, we're a primarily grant-making organisation. All of our funding comes from the ITF and from our own investments. So we're primarily working with frontline partners to provide welfare services for seafarers and their families. So we'd already moved somewhat away from funding seafarers centres in ports and more towards funding things like Seafarer Connect, Wi-Fi projects, things that deliver access to communication in ports in the absence of other things, which I'm sure is now should be available through different forms of technology. So the question is, why isn't it? Why is it only in a few companies? I think, you know, as well, it's been said that there's a lot of sort of support material that can be delivered on a digital platform, but I don't think that takes away the importance of face-to-face human contact. And it really upsets me, the discussion about the future of seafarers and smaller crews, and the idea that shore leave might not be practical or might not be affordable, because I can't understand why, when we look at the future, why we shouldn't aspire to better forms of work, better quality of experience. And seafarers, for sure, like to go ashore, like to travel, like to see a bit of the world, not necessarily just the inside of a port, but ideally actually go and see a town, you know. And it should be possible. Kind of new technology should make more decent work, more kind of quality of life part of the picture, part of the aspiration. And the digitalisation should be doing the drudge work that people have to do.
But as I said, 90% of what you will need anyway as a digital platform, a future-proof digital platform, which you can roll out today, which you will need anyway with the ongoing autonomy of the vessels, which will never lead to an unmanned vessel, but smaller crews. 90% of that cost you need anyway. And then 10% on that is to really invest in your people on board. So I think it's an absolute no-brainer in that sense.
Just to mention a couple other points here, we are struggling with time a little bit, but just to say that I want to acknowledge some of these other questions here. One earlier from Gordon Foote saying, how can it be that over 100 IMO signatory states can still not sign up seafarers as key workers? They should be ashamed. And I think, again, we've covered that earlier, is the role of these associations. And one from Robert Kenworthy again saying, to you, Ronald, that another key word is value and respect. The company needs to show they value their crew. It's easy to show it for shore staff, that they're valued and treated with respect. How can we show shipboard staff? And I think you've answered that by having these platforms. But I think it comes back to, you know, this hierarchy of needs. how many of our seafarers in our global population can really say that they are respected and valued by everyone. And one from Peter Swift here saying, do we take sufficiently the holistic approach to wellness and well-being? And I think that's what we're trying to do here. Peter, hopefully it comes through that we're covering the points that we are. Final comment.
Well, final comment on what Robert is questioning. I see somewhere. I think it links to, should we restrict apps and internet? It's a similar type of question. I think we should respect everyone on board, regardless their rank, and we should leave it to them and treat them as adults on how they use the internet, like everyone else is doing. And everyone else on shore is using the internet and apps and his phone the whole day and still is capable of doing a proper job for his boss. So why wouldn't that be at sea? And on top of that, any platform that you buy, you can still set a couple of controls and monitors on the usage of it. So I think that's also part of respect in that way.
But I think there's a communication thing here that I want to come back to this point that for some it might be only $20. For others it's $20 that some owners and operators won't pay. And I think that there's a big communication. Just on the final question to you then, Sarah, that with all that's going on, and we have to remain optimistic, we have to look at the glass being half full. Where is the meter on your view of the world? Are you hopeful that we're going to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. Surely, absolutely, we must think that we're going to get there. And I think technology and digital, surely, it opens up so many opportunities for us to work with it. But I don't think it should be one way or another. It needs to work together, surely, the way forward.
Okay, well, on that positive note, we'll finish this panel. But our thanks to Ronald, Katie, and to Sarah. Thank you very much for panel number 3. Okay, I would like to invite others to come and join us. I think what we'll do is we'll get everybody moving at the same time. If I could call on David Giberman, who's our next speaker, and if I could also call on Martin Foley and Simon Grange to join us up here. As with the other panel, I'll start by introducing our speaker, and then I'll cover both of our speakers here, both panelists here. So, David, welcome. And David Giberman is the Principal Surveyor of the Isle of Man Ship Registry. So we have a flag state here to question in a few minutes. That's good. And jointly in charge of a survey team at the Ship Registry, which you've been part of for 15 years. And that David has been bringing his seagoing and commercial experience to the regulatory environment at the Isle of Man. And we look forward to your viewpoints then on safety and crew welfare. David, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. And also thank you to everybody else who's spoken today. It's great doing the last spot of the day because everything seems to align. Crew welfare, digitisation, and what I'm going to talk about is an app. Having just discussed apps a minute ago, is there too many apps in the world? I'm sure this will be a conversation we'll have as we move on to the panel section. A little bit about the Isle of Man Ship Registry. We've got about 400 ships, commercial yachts. That's about 10,000 seafarers. So as a flag state, we take our seafarers very seriously. They're the lifeblood of our ships, and we do try to look after them as best as we can. So what we've launched is the Isle of Man Ship Registry Crew Matters Seafarer Welfare app. It does what it says in the tin. I'll take you through it very shortly in our short time. But I must point out we rolled it out to all seafarers on Isle of Man ships originally. A couple of months ago we thought, hang about a minute, let's make this wider, and it's free. So if you're in the room today, go into Google Store, Play Store, or the App Store, you can download it for free and have a play. What I'll be showing you as we go through the slides is the October release, which should have even more functionality, which should be developed as we go through it. So, we looked at this about 4 years ago. As a flag state, we were seeing disappearances at sea, poor crew welfare, just these distinction points that were coming through and keep hitting us on those, going, what's going on here? So we went around all our partners, had the same discussion. You know what? They were finding how all the same. And this is before the pandemic. The seafarers are struggling. That's what's coming out of it. Shoreside, as we discussed earlier on, we got the campaigns go around where we say it's okay not to be okay, good to talk, good to listen. Is that getting through to the seafarers? As somebody this morning, earlier on today, spoke about when they mentioned it on board the vessels, it met with a silence, a stony silence. They didn't know where to go with it. So there's an issue. The pandemic, of course, has accentuated that 10, 15, 20 times. So what we've done, we have worked with our partners, which are Tappit. They're our IT suppliers. They supply also the live stream studios, which I'll come to in a minute. Stella Maris, who will explain exactly what they do from in the corner in a minute. For those that can read Latin, don't worry, we're still developing this. Picked up on that one, we won't be delivering in Latin. Unless the seafarers want it in Latin, then we'll do it in Latin. Iswan, sold by sitting across there as well. Maritime Oil and Gas, they're based on the Isle of Man. Most people probably won't know about them, neither did I till a few weeks ago. But they're providing an app for seafarers where they can actually transfer money securely at a rate for seafarers. And of course, Nautilus, the union, who I'm sure everybody knows roughly where the union is. So there are partners in this at the moment. If anybody else wants to join us, more than welcome, come and talk to us afterwards. But about being an app, there's lots of apps out there. We know that. Everybody's got their own app, so this is a single signpost to an area where we can signpost people into different areas, as we do. What's the primary objective of the app? It does what it says in the tin. To positive influence lives of seafarers using onboard connectivity. We've got studios based on the Isle of Man, and we are live streaming wellness events. Fitness, education, spiritual. We've been live streaming care of Stella Maris, thank you very much, some religious services from the Philippines. Basically to bring live streaming direct to the ships, which talks into connectivity we discussed earlier on with Inmarsat. And it's quite surprising how little connectivity is actually out there at the moment on board the ships. There are some great thought leaders out there. You've got the V ships of the world, you've got Columbia, you've got Shell, thank you very much. Brilliant. But there's a lot of companies behind it, even some big companies as well, who still, I was quite astounded when I heard, was it 6% have video streaming on board? I mean, wow. We're so far behind the rest of the world at the moment, and it really shouldn't be. So that's the primary objective, to bring welfare live stream on board. We realise, of course, that where you've got poor connectivity, you're not going to be able to live stream. So we're also going to offer the option to download videos. And so when you come into port on your own phone, you can download it through your 4G if you've got it, and then you can take it away and do all these services, yoga, etc., as you go away. Popularity, we have got yoga in there, so it's quite surprising. Actually, yoga is more popular than church services. Apologies. But that's the feedback we're going to get from the seafarers, and we'll keep talking to the seafarers. What do you want? What can we give you? We've got constant loop going there as well. So we've had this up and running for about 6 months now. We're currently in the middle of a big change on it to try and get more feedback, and say October will be the bigger release of it. Where can you do these classes? If you yoga, you might want to do it in your cabin. You might want to do it outside. If you do a religious service, maybe you want to do it with your colleagues in the mess room. If you're doing a keep fitness class, what about the whole team on board the ship doing it in one go? It's about wellness on board the ship. It's making everybody get involved, get out of the cabins, discuss, talk, and do items together. And also with the signposting earlier on, if you're having issues, you can talk to somebody. If you've got connectivity, you can press a button and it'll take you through to NIS1 counsellor or to Stella Maris. So while these organisations are brilliant at the moment at gangway presence, they'll come and meet you, they'll sort out your shopping, spiritual needs, whatever you want, basically, from my experience. What this does, this brings this to the ocean. So 24/7, middle of the Pacific, you've got problems, you're talking, you want to talk to somebody, you have a counsellor, you want to talk to somebody who can help you out. This is where this comes into its own. So it's not just about live streaming, not about downloading videos, it's also giving a signpost to somebody you can talk to when you might be in the direst needs. We're also adding additional features to this all the time. Certification, in particular for the yachts. Probably the yachts are doing the yoga, to be fair. Certificates where they haven't got a shore manager because they're under 500 tons. The crew can take control of the certification. What have I got? Simple reminders. When's it going to run out? When's it going to expire? Hours of rest. Now, I know companies obviously have their own hours of rest programs. They wouldn't want to circumvent this. This is just another tool seafarers might want to use. This links into the recording of sea time as well, which is also a requirement. And all of this is to complement what the companies already have there. There's really good tools out there companies are using. This is just to add to it. And of course, this was an Isle of Man-centric tool when we first designed it, so you link to the Isle of Man regulations, Master's Handbook, shipping notices we issue. It's all good guidance, but now we're opening up to anybody. Anybody who wants to go, we think it's really useful guidance anyway. So that's it in a nutshell. It's another app, sorry, but hopefully it condenses lots of things into one single app, and we can signpost issues out to other people. So have a play with it. Do download it, please. It's free. And please give us feedback on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Just as you sit down, and before I go to the introductions, just a couple of immediate questions on this. Do you then, as a registry, because your role is quite different to some of the other stakeholders, do you have any influence on the owners on your registry to use this?
No.
So it's still voluntary, right?
It's all voluntary at the moment, yes.
So
Yeah.
what percentage of take-up would you say you have with your owners?
Quite low. To be quite honest, we thought it'd be higher. We thought it'd be much higher, which is part of the reason we're rolling out to the rest of the world to try and get the traction up with it as well. We know some companies already have this similar thing on board, some don't. But what we're finding is it links into, if I take a step back, during the pandemic, we can't get on board the ships to do surveys. So we moved to remote survey technology, which is brilliant. It was coming anyway. We really pushed it forward now. And that's where we found out where the problems with connectivity. We're going, big companies, you think, be able to connect and do live streaming to look at show me the oil and water separator, is it working? And you can't do it. And you should be able to do it really in this day and age. So that's becoming the regulatory tool going, actually, we need to see you. And you need to provide decent connectivity for us to do our statutory requirements. So we think that will grow, and when that grows, this will grow with it when they get the connectivity and the seafarers get involved with it as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that in a candid way, because obviously that has an impact on what size of population of the seafarers that it's reaching, and I don't doubt that it will have the ability to influence to some extent, but what's the size of the population is something, as you just said, we need to grow, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Just a couple of immediate things, but just then to move on with the rest of our team here, that immediately to my left, someone who probably needs no introduction to you again, is Martin Foley, the Chief Executive of Stella Maris, formerly Apostleship of the Sea. Now, you're still saying that, but I mean, I still remember it when it's Apostleship, but did many people still remember it? I mean, that...
As Apostleship of the Sea?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
But
It's still a name that was well known.
Latin, as David was saying. It's a bit easy to say, particularly for individuals who don't speak English as a first language.
I can hardly say it myself. Well, English isn't my first language. What am I talking about? But anyway, and anyway, Martin, everybody knows you, but we'll call on you to give us your views in a moment, and also to introduce Simon Grange, who's perhaps the newest newcomer that we have had today. What is it I've got here? Simon, June 2021, you took over.
Yes, it's 3 months, and I must admit I'm new to maritime. I've got an experience in the charity sector in the UK and international development, but my first time in maritime, and it feels like a foreign land with its own customs, culture and language, but I'm coping.
No, what you mean is after 3 months you're an expert and you're on a panel, right? So
Yeah, there is that.
Yeah, there is that, okay. But Martin, your view of the world, let's hear that first.
Well, on behalf of Stella Maris, I'd like to begin by paying tribute to seafarers and their families. And I think, as a number of our speakers have said today, it's important that we don't forget the critical role that families play in supporting seafarers. When the world stopped, seafarers kept things moving. But I think they did so at a cost to their mental and their physical well-being. And that's why Stella Maris will continue to be there for them. And of course, technology has a critical role to play in serving seafarers. It's a critical part of the chaplain's toolkit. But I've been looking forward to this opportunity today to meet together. And seafarers, as professionals, are no different to you and I. And I think they greatly value the opportunity to meet in person with a chaplain and a ship visitor. Those relational, personal connections have never been more important than they are now. And I'd just like to share a brief example of why that is important. It was sent to me this morning by a colleague in Italy, following the death by accident on board of a Filipino seafarer. Tragic accident, as you can imagine. The crew are all deeply distressed, but the captain was particularly affected. And again, we can neglect captains because they're carrying a lot on their shoulders. And often it's the captain, rather than the ratings, that will make a beeline for our chaplain when he or she comes on board to offload. But this particular captain has asked to leave the vessel due to hypertension. But before leaving the vessel, he told my colleague, and I quote, "You are the only ones who helped us. In these days, I was massacred. Civilians, military, of course, they do their duty, but nobody thinks about how we are, about our pain. You do." Now, with the best will in the world, that type of exchange is not really possible via the miracles of social media. And a few weeks ago, we published our Life at Sea report, and I've got a copy here. It's available to download from our website. And that gives the reader some examples of the work that has been made possible thanks to the generous support of our partners in this room and our supporters throughout the pandemic. Abandonment, piracy, modern slavery. These issues have not gone away. And that personal, relational connection will remain pivotal to all we do. So we're not going to neglect that in the months and years to come. Yes, we'll use technology and we'll use it to its full effect, but we want to build the strength of our port chaplains network, operating in over 300 ports around the world, so that we can continue to be there for seafarers and their families when they need us. And finally, we want to roll out even further our Centenary Emergency Fund, which we launched during the pandemic as a legacy from our centenary year, which we're about to close. It wasn't the centenary year, John, that we had envisaged. We had a World Congress planned, but events, dear boy. And so we launched our Centenary Emergency Fund with a view to providing short-term emergency financial support to seafarers and their families in need, because our surveys of seafarers have shown that the financial challenges they now face are immense. So we, working with our partners in this room and online, want to continue to be there to support all seafarers and their families.
Thank you for that. No, they're great words, Martin. And I think that, that face-to-face, that direct interaction, it's something that I think the industry's suffered from. And just to your point about the master who would typically have that support from you and reach out for that support, you can multiply that the number of times because of the isolation. Then we've had things on board happening with masters had to face all sorts of local authorities or investigations or whatever by himself. And we're doing digitally, remotely supporting him, but it's not quite the same as being there to say, I have your back, or, you can trust us, or we have that. Because again, trust, it's such a, as Nick has mentioned, such a strong platform to build on. If it's not there, what do we have, right? So anyway, to you, Simon, that new in the role, as we've said, but as one who's been a leading organisation in this area for some time. So, and I think would I be right in saying one of the first to have the training for the training of officers to deal with certain welfare, well-being issues. But what are the current things you're looking at?
Well, I think as somebody that's new to the sector and new to the organisation, what I want to do is try and understand what's actually going to be needed from now on. The pandemic is going to teach us an awful lot. Are we going to learn those lessons? And how do we put that into a strategy so that we continue to address the changing needs of seafarers? Because they are changing. Our helpline, which is 24/7, has been around for many years, multilingual, free, confidential, widely used. But now we see that we actually have 85% of the first contacts that we have are now online and not calls by phone. So we've had to adapt to that. We've had to open up new ways of doing that through social media platforms. But it's about what comes next as well. How do we continue to develop that service? Another new thing that we've started to do is to extend it so that we can actually provide counselling for people that contact us. So that's, recognising that there's a need and responding to it. So I suppose we've got to take that strategic approach in partnership with everybody else, the other charities that are involved, but also the rest of the sector. We are a membership organisation. We have over 80 members drawn from across the industry. And then also the other challenge for me is how do we become sustainable? Because remember that charities do these works, we respond to the need that's there, but it's a tough gig really because we are reliant on people and organisations giving us money. And that's a different challenge for us than it is for everybody else. So that is something else we need to consider, and I suppose for the industry as a whole, maybe it's something that needs to be a wider discussion about how, if we're recognising that these services need to be provided by the welfare charities, but how will that be funded? How do we keep it sustainable as we go forward?
No, I think that whole question of sustainability is crucial. I think that it kind of trips off the tongue where people talk about sustainability in the shipping industry and so on. I alluded to it earlier, but I'm hearing it directly here, is that if we don't have the people that we look after, the people to drive our business, how can we have a sustainable industry? And are we still even today investing enough in all of these areas that we need to address? I'm going to take a couple of quick points from the Slido. And some of them again just statements, but I just want to acknowledge people have taken the time to do this. Emilad Pascal was acknowledging that proper internet is a key necessity. Jonathan Hurd supporting the point made earlier by Mark about the stress on all staff, not just ship staff. Captain Matthew Fraser says here that ISM requires a DPA for a direct link. MLC has formalised complaints process, which it is, and should we require a separate support mechanism? And I think we do. But I think at the moment it's another stress point. It all falls on DPAs, I think, that are taking a lot of that. I mean, other channels, but in terms of a ship operations office, it'll be the DPA who's picking up a lot of that, and they're having to cover all this extra area. And again, there was a question in here. I think I've just about covered most of them. If I haven't, then with all the other groups here, we will be coming out to everybody who's put in a question and covering it if I haven't quite covered it here. But there was something, if I may, if the panel will just allow me just to address it for a moment, which is because there was a lot of likes, like 9 for these questions, and I've linked them together from Sebastian Jacques and Carly Fields, and it was, what further provisions have been made to include seafarer well-being in charter parties? And the other one was, how do we bridge the very different well-being standards and aspirations of all ship owners and charterers? Will the good get better while the bad carry on as normal? I think this is a crucial area that obviously the commercial drivers in this business, and again, one of the charterers, the whole commercial end of the operation, we all like to say things like, we won't compromise safety for commercial pressure and so on, but we face commercial pressures every day. It's the nature of running the business. And at various points during the worst days of COVID, with the hundreds of thousands of people on board ships, and even today, there were some requirements that were getting reported in to me through Bahamas ship owners and ICS, of many owners feeling that they will be giving charter parties that said no crew reliefs during this charter, this time charter, or more subtly, all crew changes must be done before this charter starts, which is a bit of a catch-22 if the ship was in a place where they couldn't really do it. So I think it's a matter of saying, I think it's improved. I think it has been more realistic now, but I think the questions are right to be asked in the sense that we need to make sure that our charterers are in the table too, around the table when we're discussing these things. Well, it all comes back to the same thing. It's all that impact on our seafarers. But just coming back to, I think I've covered most of the general questions in the in the Slido, but given the impact that there's been, Martin, on your face-to-face interactions with the sea staff, how are you getting the feedback from them? How are you able to keep the finger on the pulse and your relationship with them going?
Yeah, well, it's been difficult. There's no getting away from that. You know, for an organisation that is built upon that relational approach, not being able to visit ships as frequently as we might like to, has presented us with a challenge. We have surveyed seafarers during the pandemic, not in a particularly scientific way, but we've gone out to seafarers and asked them how we can best help them. We've taken account of other research that is out there. And again, they're not a case apart, is the point I would make. You know, many people in our society are now deeply worried about their financial futures. Seafarers are no different. And sometimes I feel slightly sceptical at apps that seek to address general well-being, when often what would help a seafarer's well-being and that of his family is to be remunerated properly and in a timely fashion, to not be abandoned in a foreign port and left to his own devices, dependent upon the help of Stella Maris or another seafarers' welfare charity. So, whilst I think as Nick said that, you know, or other speakers said about amplification of concerns, the pandemic has amplified some of the issues, but they're the same issues, I would argue.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it seems to me that our seafarers need to get, listening to all the feedback today, but listening to what you're saying, they need to get some sort of positive affirmation that someone's listening to them, someone's aware of these concerns, or are they completely isolated? So we need some...
I think advocacy is a point that's been raised by a number of speakers today. And I suppose being self-critical, you know, that's an area where I would say another welfare charities a week, we're very good to give ourselves a pat on the back at the micro stuff, helping individual seafarers and groups of seafarers. But some of the macro challenges, flags of convenience, haven't gone away. Abandonment, still there. Piracy, again, it rears its ugly head from time to time. And yes, I think there is more we could do collectively to advocate for seafarers. What we can offer, I suppose, in Stella Maris is not try and do other people's jobs for them. What we can bring to the table is the experience, the frontline experience of our chaplains and ship visitors who are regularly engaging with seafarers, whether it be in person or via social media.
If I could just come in,
yeah,
there,
please,
just
Simon,
to,
please.
just to support that. On the helpline, we get a wide range of calls, reasons why people call us. And we're able to build up a picture of what's going on for them out there. We also operate an emergency fund as well, so we can build up a picture of why people are coming to us for those sorts of reasons. Then that helps us to be able to work with our partners like Stella Maris to be able to say, look, these are the themes, these are the trends, this is what's going on. And we need to be better at that, to be able to identify what these things are, what's being said to us, but also about getting our message across so that others who have more control than we do and more power can actually do something about it.
And from your organisation, have you identified other organisations as strategic partners for you to work with, and that you might be able to, you know, it's all going to be about forming alliances, it would then seem, because ISWAN comes at it from a slightly different way, but do you look to partner up with other organisations, or?
Yes, indeed. The fact that we're a membership organisation and the fact that we have 80 plus members from across the sector, I think puts us in a good position. We need to be talking to those members more, making them aware of what the problems are and how the part that they can play. And that enables us perhaps to advocate more effectively. And in terms of partnership, we already work very closely with all the other welfare charities. That's just a given, you know, you have to try and make sure that we're coordinating our activities.
Okay, all right. I have another thought on that, but I think there's a question come in for you, David, and it's a technical question you'll be pleased to hear.
Excellent.
Right? I hope you're ready for this. From Lisa Moore, and again, and Lisa saying,
Lisa again.
from Isle of Man, it was you that said that, and I've lost enough. For Isle of Man, is the app built specifically for low bandwidth environments? Is there background data noise? I don't even know what that question means, but anyway,
Great technical question.
Yeah.
Where's Inmarsat when you need them? I think, to be honest, I'm not terribly sure, but I think it probably is, on the basis that we're using a different app at the moment, a different bit of software to our remote surveys, totally different from this, but that's designed for low bandwidth. So one would hope this would be as well. The proof will be in the pudding come October release, when all the live streams get released again, and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
So probably not very concrete answer. Sorry, apologies, Lisa, for that one. But if it's not, feed it back to us. And if it doesn't work, come and feed it back to us. What's the problem? And we're trying to figure out. And we're going to have discussions separately with Inmarsat and other providers as well to see how we can get over this.
But just to come back on my earlier question to you, I mean, it may be an impossible question for you to answer, but if it's relatively easy technology, to use my words, and it's free, that was the other thing that registered with me, of course, why do you think the take-up isn't there with the owners? That if it's so easy for them to have and it doesn't cost anything?
Great question. It's something we've been looking at as well. So we think there was some suspicion from some of the ship owners going, what is this thing you're giving to all our seafarers? We control the seafarers, they're our business. And we're trying to say, no, we're trying to work with you. So I think there was some suspicion initially, because what we did, we actually released it out to our DPAs in our companies only. And we're finding wasn't getting it from the DPAs necessarily to do the surveys and have it, hello Mr. Seafarer, have you heard about this app? And no, I haven't. And that was coming quite thematic, which is part of the reason we decided to roll it to everybody too, not just Isle of Man seafarers. So that was one stream we thought. But yes, it's a question we asked if it's free. Maybe it goes back to the question I think Lisa was asking again earlier on about is it another app? Is there too many apps out there? People are just getting blind to it. Or maybe they can't get on it because they haven't got connectivity. If only 6% are doing video calling at the moment, can they not actually get onto it? So it's about keep sending the message.
Yeah, and that's the takeaway I have on it, is that I think we're still an industry of extremes in some ways, where you go back to what Ronald was saying. If you have certain platforms, you can do 90% of probably anything you'd ever want to do, but it can include all the safety stuff, and I've seen it on board many ships where you can track people on board, you know exactly where they are, monitor enclosed spaces and all sorts of things. There's no end to what the apps can do, but it is an app, and it's another app that talks to another app on board, and a lot of owners do have issues with some of this. And what I found to be the key issue with the type of thing that you had there is that if you're giving it to seafarers, they're having to download it onto their own private phones.
That's the plan.
And then you have this idea of who's got access to what, and so hard to get that transparency. But just as a final thought, that and a lot of it goes to what you were saying, Martin, when you talk about ship owners and managers and flag states, and we talk about shall we say traditional flag states, and we talk about second registers, and we talk about open registers, and we talk about all the other stakeholders in between. It's part of our challenge just that we're so fragmented as an industry. And that fragmentation means that we've got a group of organisations which are, as we used to say, probably an out-of-date phrase now, beyond compliance, and others, we're not even sure if they are complying. So I think you must see that firsthand as well. Huh?
You do, and I suppose from that political point of view, there are very few votes in seafarers' welfare. That's what it often boils down to, that how many politicians really feel the heat on these issues, whereas they do on many other issues. They're at the top of the agenda, and rightly so. And that's perhaps something we need to address from a very UK perspective. I don't recall a question ever being asked of the Prime Minister's questions about seafarers' welfare.
I'm trying to live on the Isle of Man, where our two ships are completely top of the news all the time.
So perhaps those are the things that we need to address. And I think there is now greater visibility of seafarers' welfare because of the pandemic, but it's still not cutting through.
Yeah. I think it's. Another word that we're looking to use here is accountability, as well as that accountability felt. And it's only when you identify that you can drive things. You can drive things forward. But we've come to the end of the time for this panel as well. I thank each of you very much indeed. In fact, maybe another few words that are coming into my mind is I remember years ago in the Human Element Guide, there was a phrase in there that resonated with me. They were talking about human element, meaning everyone involved in our industry. But the phrase they used was that for the shipping industry, the human element was the secret of our success and the victims of our failures. So perhaps that puts in some sort of stark picture, but not to make that sound negative. But I think that if we can continue that commitment to our seafarers, it will become a much more sustainable industry. Thank you very much to the panel, and thank you very much for all of you for your contribution today. It seems we've covered a lot of ground, and I'm sure that once we disseminate some of this, we'll find some constructive information that we can use to plot our way forward. So thank you very much to everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
And with that, of course, I also want to thank all of those who joined us virtually. So as I say, 250 people. I think that's been a great indication of the interest in this subject. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, just before you go, so addressing in-person audience and a virtual audience. What a phenomenal day we've had, and I thank you all very much for coming. But we have had an incredible afternoon, and with huge insight into the many topics relating to seafarers' welfare. We recognise that this has been a most extraordinary year for seafarers, maritime charities and the industry as a whole, as we have addressed the range of challenges which have confronted us. From key worker status to crew change crisis to transportation issues and welfare delivery, it has without question been a game changer for us all. I am hugely grateful to all who have spoken today. These events don't take place without a massive amount of effort, resources, collaboration and goodwill. I want to especially thank John Adams for his wonderful chairmanship, which he's undertaken with his incredibly professional style. And please join me in showing your appreciation for him. Secondly, I'd like to thank Inmarsat for their role in hosting this event. For the four charities, the Mission to Seafarers, the Seafarers Charity, Stella Maris and the Sailor Society. The team we have worked with here have been professional and helped us to deliver this conference safely and within COVID guidelines and with a lot of technology support from the back of the room. So I'd like to thank them too. Thanks to our keynote speakers, Dr. Graham Henderson and Nick Chubb, to our panel speakers, Mark O'Neill, Ronald Spithout and David Giberman, and to our panelists. And we were sorry that James Muir wasn't able to be here in person today, but we thank him in absentia for preparing his presentation, and to John for making such a splendid presentation on his behalf. We thank you all for giving up your time today and all the preparation that goes into preparing to sit on the red chairs here up front and to be under scrutiny like that. So that's really great of you to do that. But most of all, I'd like to thank you in this room for making the journey to London today, and to all of those who have tuned in around the world. And if we don't have you, we don't have an event. Whatever effort we put into making an event, it is absolutely essential that we attract you to come and listen to what has to be said. And seafarers' welfare is such an important topic, and we thank you for your support. I thank the charity representatives for their support in putting on this event. It has been a collaborative effort. The Mission to Seafarers, the Sailor Society, the Seafarers Charity and Stella Maris. It has been a collaborative event with all of us playing a part in ensuring its success. I thank my staff, Krishna and Nina, in particular for their support and for keeping the timeline all in place, and for John for keeping us to time so superbly. I won't keep you any longer, and I hope that we'll be able to repeat this event in 2 years' time. And I thank you and hope you've had an informative and enjoyable afternoon, and I wish you a pleasant evening. Thank you.